keep repeating himself every meeting. I think we want to center ourselves on the important work that is ahead of us. The 16-member body is comprised of local health officers, academic partners, thought leaders, and legislators. Maryland Department of Health is represented by the Deputy Secretary for Public Health Services, the Deputy Secretary for Behavioral Health, and the Director of the Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities. Many additional leaders and professionals are contributing to the Commission's 5 work groups. These work groups are exploring 5 key subject areas relevant to this mission, which is funding, governance and organizational capabilities, workforce, data and information technology, and communications and public health engagement. Our goal is to ensure the public health system is designed to help our Marylanders achieve their best health and a lifetime of wellness. Our meetings are held monthly, although we'll have a changeover to our schedule that you'll hear about shortly. We're, for the next 2 months, going to a two meetings a month schedule for April and for May, just because of the work that we have ahead of us. The meetings are streamed online, so they are de facto hybrid meetings. And for especially our listeners who may be new to us, please visit our website at health.maryland.gov/COPH, Commission on Public Health. That number again is health.maryland.gov/COPH. This is a public meeting, and we have followed the requirements of posting and notification of this meeting. This meeting is being video recorded. By your continued participation in this meeting, you consent to the video recording. If you do not consent to the video recording, you have the option now of leaving the meeting at any time. We ask that members of the public who may be attending on our web connection to mute their microphones during this session. I want to reemphasize the fact that this meeting, especially starting today and for our next meetings, does not include a time period for public comments, and we will not be monitoring the chat function during the meeting. We encourage public comments to be sent via email to md.coph@maryland.gov. Again, the email is md.coph@maryland.gov for comments. So in essence, today we're going to start sort of putting in the requirements for us to conduct our business as efficiently as possible. That in essence is the microphones will be open only for commissioners and staff members as needed to fulfill obligations of providing our support here. Anyone else, and that includes work group team members. I know in the past we've sort of allowed people to sort of speak out when they raise their hands. Starting today, we really are going to be limiting ourselves to the commissioners. We ask work group members to work through your work groups, to work through your work group leads, or even to provide email comments to us as well, or sidebar comments later to us personally, but not during the course of this meeting. The individuals who serve on the commission are subject to Maryland public ethics laws, and all have confirmed their agreement to this in their applications and listed any conflicts of interest. There's also attendance requirements for individuals appointed by the governor as outlined in state government article section 8-501 that talks about our attendance here. The attendance, however, does not apply to the ex officios. I will now ask Shane to conduct a roll call of the commissioners. Please, Shane.
Delegate Heather Bagnall, Camille Blake Fall, Christopher Brandt, Dr. Mina Brewster,
here.
Jean Drummond, Senator Clarence Lamb, Dr. Matthew Levy, Mr. Benjamin Chen, Dr. Boris Lushniak,
Here.
Dr. Nilesh Kalyanaraman,
Here.
Dr. Oluwatosin Olateju,
Here.
Dr. Maura Rossman,
Present.
Dr. Nicole Rochester,
Present.
Michelle Spencer,
Present.
Alan Twig.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, we do have a quorum. Next on our sort of agenda is the adoption of the agenda. The agenda has been previously sent out to individuals and through our website. And now and you'll note that today's agenda is really sort of focused on something a little bit different, right? In the past meetings, we've always had outside speakers providing information. This is our switchover meeting. To a large extent today, commissioners, and the reason we want to limit comments from the commissioners alone is we began the process of us achieving our last segment of this commission's work. Now, this last segment doesn't mean we're done in a week or a month. It means that it is the last segment. And we do have a timeline that we've been sharing with you already, and we are going to go through once again. But in essence is right now we're at the point of working with our working groups, making sure that they have, in essence, done their due diligence with the expertise they have. And now for us to begin discussions today about recommendations of the review process regarding what the recommendations are going to be looking like, how we're going to be assessing them, how we're going to be discussing them. So today's meeting, in essence, is a prelude to what's going to be a series of meetings of us ultimately having the beginnings of that ending stage. And the ending stage is going to be a final report with recommendations from this commission. So the agenda you'll notice today is a little bit different. Are there any comments on this agenda from commissioners or staff members here? If there are no comments, I ask for a motion to approve today's agenda.
Second.
Thank you so much. We ask you signify your voice vote by saying aye. Do you agree?
Aye.
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 Aye. Are there any nays regarding the adoption of the agenda? Has anyone abstained? Okay, the ayes have it, and we adopt today's agenda as listed. We also have posted the previous meeting agenda. The previous meeting occurred on March 13th, 2025. These were posted and distributed. Are there any comments on the minutes from the previous meeting? If there are none, I ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Okay, we have a move and we have a second. Everyone who agrees with the approval of the March 13 minutes, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays? Has anyone abstained? Okay, we hereby approve the March 13 meetings for the record. The next part of our agenda is to discuss our commission updates. I'll ask our incredible staff lead here, who always travels in from afar from the state of Indiana, Shane Hatchett, to please lead this part of our agenda. Shane.
Thank you, Boris. And miraculously, you're back on schedule.
Wow, look at that.
All right. Thanks for that introduction. And as usual, we start off with our timeline that looks at not only what we have on the agenda to cover today, but prospectively. And candidly, the thing that stands out to me the most about this is as I was pulling this screenshot and putting it into the slide deck, there's only one more column after August. We are nearing the finish line of this work. There's still a significant amount of work to be done, but the end is in sight in terms of that September 11th meeting where we will adopt our final report and get that submitted to the governor and legislature by the October 1st deadline. So I think we're really seeing great momentum here and excited to be working with you to help accomplish that. So a couple things to focus on for this slide, other than that one tidbit is, and I'll reiterate this a couple times throughout my comments here, but we have these 4 meetings in the month of April and May solely focused on the recommendation development and review process. And May 20th is that kind of last point for folks to be able to submit a recommendation for the first time for consideration by the commission, because after that, once we get to that June 5th meeting, barring some change by this group, we are planning to adopt a final slate of draft recommendations at that meeting to take to public comment for the 30-day period required by statute. So we are asking work groups to plan to have all of their recommendations that have not been reviewed at least once by the commission in by that point in time. I'll talk a little bit more in a bit about that overall process of how we kind of envision this iteratively working. But I call that out specifically because we know that as work groups are resubmitting based on commissioner feedback, you know, there will be cycles of this kind of review, but we don't want folks waiting until that very last point to get stuff in if they've got stuff ready. So this is really just to kind of reiterate what that timeline and drop dead date looks like. Then over the summer, we do have a couple meetings, and I know that folks have vacations and time with their families planned. So I want to make sure that we are thoughtful about potential absences and making sure we've got quorum and so forth. And so I'll ask it again, but please make sure that if you're not going to be able to make one of those meeting dates, that you let us know in advance so that if we do run into a problem, we can talk about that at the executive level and figure out a strategy more or less. Next slide. It is with great sadness that I shared that Fran Phillips has resigned, and you probably picked up on that since I did not call her name, and many of you probably got a notice from her or heard through the work group about that. Unfortunately, she had some personal commitments that simply prevented her from being able to continue in this work, despite her great fondness for it. We really are going to miss that expertise and frankly passion. So it's unfortunate, but at the same time, where we are in this process, we're not actively seeking to backfill that slot on the commission, simply because trying to get someone up to speed with where we are, and frankly, the short runway that we have left between now and October really would not be fair to that person to feel like they could fully contribute to the process. And I think at this stage, we've got enough expertise between the work group talent and our commissioners who are still present that we can get this over the finish line, but it certainly will be something that we noticed that absence. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that if you had not yet heard about that.
And just to clarify, Shane, I just want to make sure that it's not necessarily up to us not to repost. It's not our job to basically to refill that 16th position. Fran's decision to step away has been relayed to the governor's office. If the governor decided to supply somebody as a 16th, we will obviously embrace them.
Absolutely.
But at this point, unlike previous times where we had turnover in this group, we desperately needed to fill certain gaps, i.e. Matt Levy coming on board as a health department representative. In this case, our approach from the executive committee's aspect was, if the governor decides to do it, fine. If not, then we're not pressing it at this stage, only because, as Shane had mentioned, we're far enough along into this process I'm also confident that although Fran, will be missed as a regular member of this, that she, at least to me, has reflected that she still wants to be involved, and we will make sure that she's a reviewer of things and will be so acknowledged, not only as a commissioner to this point in time, but wants to at least be available to us. So
Thanks for that clarification. Yes, we'll accept whoever is appointed to us, but suspect that will kind of be the path forward. We are excited to share that we have secured the technical writer who will be helping us draft the final report. It is the same individual who helped us draft the interim, so they already have that expertise from last time, and we'll be able to leverage that previous experience. We actually had a bit of an onboarding phone call today with them, and already asking great questions and getting information pulled together. So we really are nearing that point at which the work that you're doing is starting to manifest in the form of that final product. And this person is really excited to continue working on this in particular and help make sure that we get the best possible outcome with this final report. And as I mentioned, just summer schedule, please make sure that you're available for those meeting dates. And if not, let us know earlier than later so that we can make note of that and proceed from there. I'm happy to answer any questions about that material up to this point. Otherwise, I can go right into the development and review process for the submission of recommendation drafts. So, any questions from folks on the line or the room? Okay. Next slide. So we had a number of conversations at the executive committee level to try and figure out what's the most effective way to facilitate us talking through these recommendation submissions, and also honoring the fact that work groups have other commitments and challenges that they're working through, and that a lot of the folks engaged are doing this work on top of their daily jobs. And so we want to be respectful of that. And at the same time, with this rolling submission process, it does not necessarily allow us to immediately see what the full spectrum of recommendations will be, right? And so in that vein, what we've done is work with the executive committee to develop a process that will allow us to discuss and review what's been submitted and kind of make provide feedback as well as a disposition with respect to what's been submitted, but not necessarily say this is an absolute recommendation that will land in the draft slate necessary, or excuse me, that will end up in the final report. So it gives us a bit of time to review and advance things, as well as send recommendations back to the work groups. But it holds all of them that do get some type of positive review at this stage until that June 5th meeting, so that we can adopt them formally as a slate. And so the actions that we're going to talk about that the commission will take over the next 4 meetings are a little bit limited intentionally to make sure that we are thinking about these submissions in a way that is moving the work forward and providing feedback to the work groups, but also not necessarily boxing us in or saying that we have fully committed to something without seeing the full breadth of what gets submitted. And so this slide in particular is meant to highlight that idea of this review phase over the next 4 meetings. So April 3rd, 15th, and May 1st and 20th, where we'll be reviewing and discussing and iterating on these submissions, and the actual adoption of that draft slate of recommendations that will be posted for public comment occurs June 5th, with the ideal posting being on June 6th. and starting that 30-day period that's required by statute. Next slide. So the three actions that the commissioners will be taking on each submission at this stage is either more consideration is needed for this particular submission. It's essentially a concept that could be supported, but needs a bit more work potentially, or there's specific feedback to be shared to the work group to help refine and get it to a place where the commission feels that it's closer to that final state. And so it would essentially be recommitted back to a particular work group, maybe the submitting work group, or perhaps a work group that intersects with that because it's a cross-cutting theme and we want to make sure that we've gotten their perspective. And again, we are asking for all of those first submissions by May 20th, and certainly having any final feedback opportunities at that May 20th meeting, since June 5th will be that point at which we make the final vote on the slate of recommendations that gets posted. The second option that commissioners would be able to vote on is that a recommendation submission is approved to be advanced to that slate for June 5th. There may be minor tweaks that are needed, nothing necessarily substantive, but for the most part, it is good to go. And folks feel like this has been discussed enough and there's great consensus around this topic. And then the last one, which I suspect based on all of our deep dive conversations and other workshop activities and conversations we've had along the way, that this will be less likely, but we wanted to make sure that it at least was an option if it was needed. But if a concept is discussed and there simply isn't enough support to advance it by a majority vote here, we would not necessarily move that submission to the slate unless there were some sort of further discussion that occurred. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not something that couldn't be included in the areas for future inquiry within the work group final report sections. So it's not that the idea is, for naught, or that it won't be discussed ever again. It's simply saying that where it stands at this moment, the commission does not feel that the support is able to be offered there. Hilson?
Yeah, I think for flow, to make it flow better, I think we should rearrange it in order. So the one in the middle, I think it can come as the first, so that it's in that order, since it's the most approved, right? And then following that is if it needs to be sent back, so the middle one can come to the top, the one on top can come to the middle, and then the one at the bottom is, I don't want to call it dead, but yeah, that's like, it's not going anywhere. That way it's in that order. That's just a suggestion anyways.
Sure, we can make that change for future meetings.
All right.
Any other questions about these actions? Next slide. So the process that we are proposing to take is that the submissions would be obviously received by staff as we've communicated prior to this point, and the staff will add them to the tracking list that has been sent out earlier, and we'll update that regularly and provide that to folks most likely on a weekly basis, maybe more frequently if we see a large volume of updates coming in. However, I suspect with the semi-weekly meetings of the work groups that weekly update would be sufficient. And this will be the primary way in which commissioners and work group members and co-chairs would be able to kind of get a sense of what is coming down the pipeline in terms of development, as well as what the dispositions are for the recommendation submissions that have been discussed already, or perhaps recommitted back to a work group. So this will help us manage and track these as they're moving through the process and create that consistent accountability in the path. Again, at each of these meetings, commissioners will be providing their feedback, and we're asking folks to come prepared to share and offer that feedback. And this, candidly is really the opportunity and the forum for which this feedback should be happening. There won't be, offline massive dialogues occurring, because we want to make sure that these that these conversations are happening in an open forum where everyone who will be voting on this will have the opportunity to hear that information and inform their thinking on this process. So, we want to make sure that kind of folks are aware of that and understand that, this is the proper place for having those conversations. Ultimately leading to the commission taking one of those three actions that I mentioned a bit ago. And just to reiterate, that it will be, we'll go over that again in a moment, just to make sure folks are aware. And then at the June 5th meeting is when we will bring forward the slate of those submissions that folks have said, yes, these submissions are approved to go on the slate, and we want to make sure that this is the final list. There may need to be some refinement and consolidation based on what's been advanced in the different iterations between the work groups. And so that's why we are not necessarily committing to final recommendations at this point, but at that June 5th meeting. So we're approving concepts of submissions now, so that on June 5th, we are approving a slate of final recommendations that have been refined and match the discussion and intent of the commission along the way. That slate will be posted from June 6th to July 7th, and the public comments will be reviewed and sent out to work groups if they're substantive, so that they can start to digest that information and not necessarily taking action on it yet, but at least being aware of what's coming in. We'll talk more about what that process looks like once we get a bit closer to that, but we do want to start getting folks socialized to the idea that, there will be a bit of work after developing these recommendations with potential refinement based on feedback over the summer as well. Next slide. With respect to the meetings themselves, we'll send the submissions and this tracker out, as I mentioned, at least weekly to all the commissioners and work group co-chairs. And if we need to share it more broadly with all the work group members, we can certainly look into that too. But this list is really the primary way that we'll be tracking and managing all of those. If there are specific questions about a submission or more backup documentation is desired, we can certainly pull that up, but we're not going to push all that out to everyone, because we don't want to have issues with version control or potentially cause overwhelming challenges with clogging up inboxes and just the sheer volume of what's out there. So we're trying to balance giving you the information that you need to make informed decisions without overwhelming you along the way. So please provide feedback if you feel like you're not getting enough, or if you feel like you're getting too much. We'll try to work with you on that a bit. The submissions that are ready to be discussed and voted on for advancement at the meeting will be read into the record by one of the staff here. And if work group co-chair or their designee would like to provide some additional detail, or if there are specific questions, that will be asked to them. Specifically, the staff are simply facilitating that. And so in some ways, and you'll see this with the slides that we sent out today, that what we got is what we've shared with you. And so we're applying a little bit of quality control to that, but we are not doing a ton there because we want to honor what the work groups have put forward. There might be some formatting changes, but the substance is what the work groups have put forward, and we want to let them kind of control how that gets presented and shared with you. So really what you're seeing is just us taking that and translating it into the PowerPoint slides, simply so that we have a way of showing it to you and putting it into the historical record for the commission itself. We're, for purposes of planning, budgeting about 15 minutes for these recommendations. That said, we know that some are going to take a lot longer than 15 minutes and some may not take the full 15 minutes. We're only saying that just so we have a sense of what to plan for. And so don't feel that we're necessarily constrained to that. But I would offer that if something hasn't been a consensus or nucleus achieved within that 15-minute period, I would humbly submit that maybe it needs to go back to the work group for additional work so that, you know, it could be more easily discussed within a 15-minute period going forward. But that said, we don't want to stifle the conversation or have folks feel like that, you know, they're in a bit of a hot seat. If they don't speak their piece now, they'll never get to again. That's certainly not the intent. This is just trying to create a bit of expectations and understanding about where we are. Next slide. So again, those three actions are: the submission is approved to be advanced to the recommendation slate, more consideration is needed, and if the concept could be supported, but additional work is needed from the work group. And then the third option is it's not able to be supported, and the consideration, or excuse me, the submission is considered reviewed and closed. I think that's the last slide. Yep. So any questions about that process or concerns from folks before we kind of get into the actual submissions themselves?
Great. So commissioners in particular, those online, I can see those in the room here, but is this approach sound to you? Is this something that, you know, we do want to have a discussion to make sure everybody is in agreement that this is the process that's going to be unfolding? So, and, you know, silence today means agreement, but also if you agree, then maybe speak out as well. So it's always good to hear not just silence, but, you know, what do you like about this? Are there any questions about this pathway? What we're trying to do is obviously make sure that, one, that we empower the working groups who've been working on this, right? They are the submitters. This does not, I want to sort of clarify as well, as a commissioner, we can also submit. As you know, others who are interested in this, work group members who happen, you know, the whole idea is ultimately there is going to be a public comment period that allows the public even to put in submissions, right? The comment period allows those gaps to be filled. On the other hand, we also need to be not just sort of empowering the working group leaders and their membership, but also us as commissioners to be able to sort of take on what we've all learned over the course of this last year plus of work, and where do we think that Maryland should be going in terms of its public health approach. So again, I open up the floor to comments about the process that Shane has just gone through, please.
Well, being online, I'll just submit that I'm in agreement with the outline process. I think the 15-minute period, we may need to, you know, extend at times if necessary, but overall, it makes sense.
Great, and we had some discussions about this. You know, we're all sort of setting limited, as Shane had mentioned. You know, frankly, you know, our hope is that, you know, we kind of look at this, we have vibrant discussion. But if it goes beyond 15 minutes, it shows either it's an outlier in terms of us agreeing to things. We once again, you know, and we're not afraid of discussion, but at some point be ready for the idea that, you know, we're not going to be sitting here with a big clock saying we're at 14:15 up to 9. It's not going to be like the shooting clock on the NCAA's Final Four. But that being said, is if we're slowing down and the process isn't moving ahead, this allows us to do almost the parking lot feature of these things. Send it back to the working group. Let's clarify some of the questions. You know, why is it we're having angst about it, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for that. Other commissioners? I'll chime in, you know, as now not just the chair, but as a commissioner, but also as one who's been privy to us. You know, this isn't one person's idea, and I always love the way this commission has been working, right? We have the 16 of commissioners, now 15 commissioners. We have also this executive committee, which are the 3 co-chairs plus our incredibly gifted staff. And then we have the working groups and the working group leaders. And oftentimes, you know, do we make final decisions as a result of committee action? Yeah, but it's also, I wish all of you can sit on our executive committee meetings, which are being held weekly at 9:30 a.m., right? You know, the dedication that I've seen of everybody, specifically, you know, the staff and the volunteer co-chairs, is that dedication of time on a weekly basis for us to have those meetings 9:30 every Wednesday. And that's followed up by a 4:30 meeting every Wednesday, which now allows us to expand those meetings to have sit-down sessions, at least a hybrid session or online sessions with working group leads, with the Maryland Department of Health, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of work put into this. Ultimately, when we come up with these paths forward, how was this all arranged? This really was groupthink, right? It was over a series of meetings of saying, you know, what do we think is the best approach? Now, you know, ultimately, we don't vote on it. Ultimately, we, you know, sort of put out sort of this idea of best ideas. We get a consensus. We allow ourselves to comment, to reflect on this. And that's what we've submitted to you here right now. Also, I'll put it out there that as we start practicing this, we reserve the right for us to bring up a discussion later on saying, you know what ain't working? This part ain't working. Or the 15-minute rule just doesn't apply, you know, all that, you know. There's a way for us to be able to modify this. Once again, what I'm looking for here as a commissioner is the ability for us to effectively and efficiently achieve our goal, with the idea that everybody from the commissioners is heard. We're all looking at, you know, this from various angles. We sometimes are wearing different hats as we sit on the commission. So we want those different reflections on each and every part of the submission. So this is a key feature. Okay, any other comments on process here? Mina, say something as well.
I like it.
You like it, so that's
I
good.
appreciate the opportunity to vote on moving a recommendation forward to the June slate. And so that at the June time, we can consider it across the, in the context of everything else that's been said.
Right. Good. Okay, last call for any comments from the commissioners out there. Okay, if not, we move ahead. So we have look at these ideas of the process. Now we're going to be looking at submissions for review that have been received thus far. And again, what I'm going to stress to the group is, one, we've not done this before, right? Oftentimes when we do things, we, you know, I'll provide you an example. We haven't even done a tabletop on this. So we haven't brought people into rooms saying, so I'm going to ask the commissioners in particular to give us a little leeway, right? And for you as commissioners to provide feedback, because this process now is modifiable, especially, right? We know the process, but this idea of how we're going to be discussing these submissions, right? There is a chair. The chair is going to acknowledge individuals as they raise their hands. Otherwise, we're going to kind of monitor of how this goes, right? And you know, so let's see how it goes. So Shane, you're in charge of this, of reading out. You're the
Okay. The first submission for consideration that we have is CPE-001. This was submitted by the Communications and Public Engagement Work Group. It is called the Plain Language Support Recommendation, and the purpose is to help establish plain language public health information accessibility and support. At this stage, I will turn it over to the co-chairs if they would like to discuss more, but this is what has been submitted on the screen here.
Are co-chairs available?
Thought I saw Tony and Sylvette.
Yep, I believe we're both on at the moment. And I
Okay.
actually.
What you talk a little bit, which is in essence is since you are here and since you admitted to being here, so thank you for both those aspects. Any we have it in front of us. You can see what we can read. Any other thoughts that you want to sort of present to us prior to our opening this up for discussion and questions?
I don't think so from my end, but I'll defer to my colleague Sylvette if she has any particular thoughts on this one.
No, we were in full support of this one, and so was everyone in our work group. So we shared it last week also in our workshop time. And even with the members that we were with, they also were in support of it too.
Okay, great. Thank you, work group co-chairs. This is now open for discussion.
I see the justification. Is there another slide, Jean, that gives the actual recommendation language?
This is it.
So would Tony and Sylvette be able to clarify what the actual recommendation is? Is it that it says plain language support, but is the what is the actual like request? Yeah. So it's that the recommendation is that the legislature dedicates funding or to plain language writers, editors, be a recommendation.
Exactly.
Recommendation. Okay.
Correct.
So we probably need to capture that somewhere as how we would write it in a report, basically, so we know what we're actually voting.
So from the second bullet, which is on the left in the left column, we have our reasoning why this is important, and then answering the questions about funding and those kind of things on the right. And then also the fact that most of this, like the legislative structure, is already there for it. So in our minds, it shouldn't have too much of a problem going through.
So you're citing basically the House Bill 1082, the Maryland Executive Order on Plain Language, as sort of the source of it. And I guess the recommendation, as I'm looking at it, is the implementation of this within the Maryland Department of Health.
Correct.
So is the recommendation for the plain language writers, editors to be hired by MDH? It says to be on call for MDH and local health departments. Are they going to be hired by a university and then be on call for those entities? Or are they going to so forth? And I see Maura's hand up, so I'm sorry, I didn't want to speak over hers.
Maura?
I was going to, Mina, you can go ahead.
Okay.
So I just wanted a clarification on the language of the recommendation as to who, I see the recommendation is for funding. Is there any component of the recommendation that specifies who's responsible for implementation, as in the hiring of the individuals or the making them on call for health departments, including the state and local health departments? Or is that, what was the work group thinking on that?
Yeah, I think from the work group's perspective, the question here is probably twofold, right? We want to make sure that this is in existence for both MDH and local health departments. How that's done, if the funding is allocated, I'm not really sure that the work group had a recommendation for how to do it, right? Knowing that we each have different procurement processes that we could go through and ways to do this, but that this sort of expertise needs to be available and having some funding to make it available. But the how in that, I think, is something we could continue to work out as a group, or if others have from governance or others have recommendations for how to do this, we'd be open to that. But this was a broader question of, obviously, there's not enough resources for every local health department to have an individual or to hire folks, and you don't necessarily need someone, 40 hours a week, but how do you make it a resource that's available to folks? And so that may be more of an MDH question, but that's really where the work group, I think, stopped its recommendation. Just making it available, figuring out the how of making it available is something I think we'd be open to figuring out more if we think that the recommendation needs that in there specifically to say who is doing the hiring, or is it hiring, or is it having a contracted resource.
Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful. And it might be helpful too if there's, for the commissioners who are from MDH, if you have any thoughts on this in particular, interested in hearing.
Hi, this is Maura. Just piggybacking on that, I guess totally in agreement with the plain language and the importance of plain language in public health. I guess I'm struggling with the fact that MDH has PIO, most LHDs have a PIO, and I would in terms of being a PIO, a public information officer, I would assume that they should have the skills to use plain language. And so, and recognizing that perhaps ongoing training is necessary, then maybe, I'm just going to wordsmithing that there's training available for the PIOs at the state or LHDs so that they have the skill set to implement plain language public health information.
Great. Nalesh, is there anything that you're looking at this from your perspective? Okay, Nalesh, you're on.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was fumbling with my device. I think we have a little bit more to do here, but plain language public health information, absolutely, right? And I know that the at the University of Maryland, right, the Center for Health Literacy is part of that. A lot of discussion is around 5th grade reading level or even lower as needed. So with a little bit of refinement, absolutely. And I think that's an important place for all of us, MDH, LHDs, and others to observe this guideline / standard.
So I guess that's part of my question. And again, I'm just sort of looking at this is that, in terms of its specificity of how it would be utilized, right? I understand this idea of having people, again, the funding aspect is always going to be a reach, but I'm already announcing right now, we are not stopping recommendations because of the funding issues, right? We have to do what we think is right. And if they're, that's not in our hands, right? That's going to be a legislative approach. We have to be wise and yes, prudent taxpayer citizens, et cetera, et cetera. I guess my question on this is the interplay between the state and local. Are these, individuals on call for all of public health, right? And Mina, you have an idea?
I would just, because we are tying it to the Maryland executive order on plain language, and because we do have an established health literacy center through University of Maryland, that the work group may want to consider that this be a responsibility, funded responsibility of that center to hire 2 plain language writers, editors that are on call for the governmental public health system, since we are the ones that our public is looking towards for health information, particularly as the availability of that health information declines at the national level. So I totally agree with all this. I'm just wondering if the language of the recommendation should consider specifying that option because it's a little unclear if it would become a state health department employee or if it would have to be a local health department or if there's other entities that would need to take that on. And just to the point there, like we do have PIOs, right? I mean, many of our health departments have somebody designated, but many of those PIOs aren't necessarily trained formally in communications. They often wear that hat along with 10 other hats that they wear in their role as communications leads in our agencies. And so I'm not sure that that they would have the background or time availability to maintain expertise in plain language communication, although we certainly want to continue to enhance their skill set in that area. But yes, I agree. I think an on-call resource would be exceptionally helpful.
Nilesh, is that a new hand or an old hand?
It's a new hand.
Okay.
It's a new hand. I think that some of my question is maybe a little bit broader than this specific one, that, figuring out the difference between how we implement and what needs to be implemented, right? I think there are probably I certainly have a different conception of what's required to implement this recommendation, right? And so how much are we trying to say this is what needs to be done, the implementation is different, versus we're bundling the two? Because I don't want to dive into second part implementation if that's not going to be the part that sticks to our recommendation and final report.
Yeah. So I guess the gist of this really is the support for public health information being, having expertise in that, right? And again, what I don't want us to do is get caught up on the specifics of how this would be implemented, right? Unless we strongly have a feeling, right? I mean, so, my sense of this recommendation is a little bit more work in terms of some specifics, right? One is obviously citing the way it is already, the HB 1082, the Maryland Executive Order on Plain Language, right? We all are in agreement, I think, unless we have anybody who wants to speak out, that plain language is good, non-plain language is bad. Okay, so we're good there. And that we think that the state should take this into account, right, as we're putting out public information. And I would submit to you at all levels, whether it's from the Maryland Department of Health or it's from the local health departments, right? Certainly from governmental public health, that we should implement this. And by all indications, and this is coming from our working group co-chairs, and their excellent work on this, is there's a need for this. As Mina has stated, just because you're a public information officer does not make you an expert in this. So, and again, I don't want to necessarily go as far as to say the way it's going to be implemented is the public information officer is going to write the first draft. It'll be sent to a contract type. They're going to rearrange it. They're going to send it out, and within 24 hours, right? We're not going to get it to that thing, to that level of specificity on this. But on the other hand, I think this is something that's worthwhile for us to have, right, in terms of communication. Yes, we have from a staff member from Dushanka.
Yes, I just wanted to add that as we've received these, this is again on the process side, when we have them come in under an umbrella of the work group, that maybe the work group co-leads say, we've got 4 recommendations coming to this particular area, and look at them in a certain order, so they explain how they interrelate, if they do interrelate, because I think we will see as we go through these that they are linked in a way to address some of the comments that have already been made. Okay, so we could maybe be more efficient in looking at the cluster, or at least being aware of the cluster and then talk. That's a great point.
Tosin has her hand up.
Tosin, yes.
Yes, great points. I just want to piggyback on what Morris said, that some departments have PIOs, which is untrue. In addition to getting support from academic institutions, I think we can leverage our federal entities as well. I know NIH has the Health Information Training and Resources, I'm not sure if MDH has, I think I went to APHA training and they said MDH has, but I don't know if local departments have access to that. The NIH training and resources. Nilesh, do you know?
I
I think
couldn't
a lot.
tell you off the top of my head, but
Oh, okay.
but I think that gets to the question of, right, the first part is, what is the recommendation? But when we start getting to the implementation, that's a whole
Right.
other beast, right? And that's a broad question. And so I just wanted to be clear about, if we're wrangling with both of those, that's a much bigger conversation than if we're just wrangling with the recommendation and the specificity of the recommendation.
So that has already happened.
Yeah, so that,
Right. Sorry, if you would just let me clarify my point. What I was saying is, just to be clear, the plain language support with staffing is great, but I was saying to augment Maura's point of, supporting entities that currently have PIOs, that, just leveraging federal support, I think would be great. NIH resource being one, because they have specific resources on delivering health information on languages and culture. But again, it's not prescriptive, but just leveraging, keeping in mind that funding is an issue right now. That's it. Thanks.
okay, any other discussion on this?
My hand is
yes.
still up.
Okay, great. So sorry, Sylvette.
No worries. I'd like to just share that all that was mentioned about the existing resources are all true, and we do know that. And I think in the write-up, it can say that we are aware of these existing resources, and we can say that there are PIOs in some health departments, et cetera, and they're doing as best as they can. I believe that the reason why we emphasize the plain language support is because there is still a need, despite the great effort that our PIOs are doing and despite what already exists. And so that's why this recommendation was being put into place. And so, yes, when it's, finagled with all of the great language and everything, then I believe it will sound better. But I think that, in terms of filling out the form and making sure that we were answering those specific bullets, that's what we did. But by all means, we're not saying that those do not exist or even that they haven't been effective. It's just that more of an emphasis should be put on that when we're thinking about communication and public engagement.
So I'll make a motion to adopt the recommendation from the Communications Public Engagement work group that the Commission recommends that the legislature designates $250,000 a year for the purpose of making 2 plain language writers or editors available on call for the use by Maryland Department of Health and the state's local health departments.
Okay, so that's a motion. Is that how we want to work? Again, we're walking through
Adopt it
this.
for the June slate. I should have said adopt it for the June slate. My bad.
Right. So I guess the question ultimately, again, we're walking through this, so this is live fire exercise. Are we going to be doing this and voting on each and every one in our mind, or are we putting them in one of 3 boxes?
Yeah, for the June.
Right.
That's my
For the June.
adopting for the June slate.
You do need to get a sense of where the commission
Right.
is on that. So there has to be at least a voice vote.
Yes. Okay, so we have a proposal that you have now heard. Do we have no takers on that proposal? We'll have to go back to our recording.
I kind of feel like we need to move through
Okay.
the voting.
Okay. So there's a proposal to designate for ultimately for this to be added to the June slate, but with the stipulation that the legislature look at setting aside $250,000 per year for 2 plain language writer editors to be on call for MDH and local health departments.
Yeah, I mean, so that's not the stipulation, that's
Right.
just the recommendation.
Right, recommendation.
The language of the recommendation would
Okay.
be that, which would get moved to the June slate.
Okay,
That's
so
what
we
I-
have a motion. Do we have a second on that motion?
I second Nicole Rochester.
Okay, thank you. Now we have discussion on that motion. Nilesh?
Yeah, I'll just note that I think we're walking into a difficult spot here because we're both discussing the recommendations and the implementation at the same time. And I'm just going to put it out there that I'm not going to be able to support this motion. I don't think that's the best way to do this, or even a feasible way to do this. So I'm struggling with combining the recs and the implementation. I'll just leave it at that.
So that's where we need clarity on what the recommendation is, right? To my understanding, the recommendation that the work group is putting forward is the recommendation for this funding with a purpose. So if that's not the recommendation, then we should consider what the language of the recommendation is. So Nilesh, if you're not uncomfortable with it, I'm interested in hearing what language would be separating out, as you said, implementation from, thought of the recommendation.
Sure. I think to me, the recommendation here is what we should be doing and maybe a timeline on when we should be doing it. But I think the how is going to require a lot more from the folks who are doing it in combination with folks in these work groups to actually implement it. And I'll be real instrumental for a second here, right? This is the exact type of logjam that happens with translators. If there's two people whose job it is to do plain language, right, it should be everybody's job. And how are we making sure that everybody is generating plain language? It's not. But if we only have two people bottlenecking it, I can promise you it's going to radically slow down what we're going to do, right? But that's my opinion, and others have different opinions. But I think this is where we get to the implementation side of it. So I think I've certainly interpreted our role as setting targets, and we may need funding. Like I get that. But this is very prescriptive about what is the solution as well. And I think that to me is tough, right? Because these are things coming out of the work groups to our broad commission. So that would be my recommendation in terms of how we adjust this. Plain language is defined at there's a federal government definition of plain language. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure if we have a state definition, but I've always just used the federal definition. Setting targets, but I'll stop.
Okay, Nicole, you have your hand raised as part of this discussion.
Yes, the first is a point of clarification on the process, which is, with regard to these recommendations and everything we're going to be doing today, are we expected to are these recommendations expected to simply be recommendations and not include implementation? So that's my first question. And the second, in response to Nilesh, I appreciate what you're saying, Nilesh, around kind of being so prescriptive. And I also feel that particularly with this recommendation and because of all that you all have shared in terms of we're already doing this, there are already people that do this, and what Sylvette and Tony shared, which is absolutely there is still a gap despite everyone's best efforts. So without specific guidance regarding implementation, I would worry that it's just kind of a very blanketed, we should all be using plain language, which we already know now, but we're all acknowledging that doesn't always happen. And so my understanding, and I could be wrong, I yield to the co-chairs for clarification, but my understanding was that this was a very specific recommendation to assist with everything that's already in place, that those two people would not be the sole people responsible for implementing plain language throughout the state, but that they would be available to support those who we've already acknowledged don't have either the skills or the capacity to do that job currently.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted it.
Great, thank you, Nicole. Tony.
Yeah, I think just to echo both of what Nilesh and Nicole just mentioned, I think we are looking for whatever recommendation allows for additional resources to be available to both MDH and local health departments, right? If the recommendation that we're putting here needs to be that non-descriptive, I think we're okay with that, right? The number of people versus an on-call service that maybe has numerous people on hand for this, a contractor that's doing this work. I think we're fine with changing the how. And I think it's helpful for work groups to know a bit more. I'll just say this as a work group chair, like when you say we're putting forward a recommendation, how much detail are you looking for in that recommendation, right? Are you saying we need funding to do this and stop there versus the how? Because I think that's one of the struggles from the work group's perspective on how to get these going. And I think it's a good point to Nalesha's point, like, how do you do this? It's very much in the weeds and we could do that for hours. So I am in support of if we need to go back and change this. I think from a work group perspective, if we have hey, we need it to be less descriptive, we can go back and do that. Just a question for, I think, our sake when we're meeting with our group next, what is the directive that we're giving them? Taking some of the how out and then allowing the broader commission to do some of the how if they think that's necessary. But it would be helpful for me, I think, to know what's next steps and which direction are we going? Because I think these are excellent points. And the number of people absolutely matters when you're talking about 24 jurisdictions and MDH. And part of the reason it doesn't work with the one person or multiple people, if your department's fortunate enough, is they don't have the time. So 2 people likely aren't going to fix that either. So I'm open to that, but just what would you all like us to do from here as a work group? Less specificity and more room for you all to tweak it would be helpful, because I think we're going to keep running into this. This is not going to be the last time.
Yes, Mina.
So I think perhaps it would be helpful for us as commissioners, when we see the recommendation, to see the actual language specifically stated as this is what the recommendation is. I know this is the information we're asking the work groups to submit along with their recommendation, but whatever they want us to vote on, we should see that. We're almost kind of crafting the recommendation out of the information supplied on the slide. So if the work group is suggesting that we have, is it a policy recommendation that the legislature designates a fund to support plain language, use by the state and local health departments by making an on-call mechanism available? Is it that we specify how much funding and that it would hire 2 editors to be on call for MDH and local health departments? Is it that we specify that they're, where those individuals, if that is part of the recommendation, where those individuals are hired? I mean, I feel like that, if the work group has been discussing all of this, I would be interested in seeing their recommendation specifically. And some of these recommendations may be recommendations about implementation. I don't necessarily read this as being a stopgap. I don't read this as being every single thing that a health department puts out has to go through these 2 language writers, editors. I see it as how it's written is to be on call, to provide support. And so it would be an additional resource made available. But I also don't see that it would need to come from MDH or any particular entity. So I do see it somewhat open for implementation, interpretation at that point. But it sounds like to me, the work group is recommending that there be resources designated to support state and local health departments in applying plain language in their communications. And if that's the overall intent, we can certainly modify the motion to make that the recommendation, but it would be helpful if the work groups, say exactly what the language of the recommendation is, and then we can tweak it from there.
I think exactly what you just said, Mina. The how, I think, matters a lot less to the group, right? And we actually don't get to pull most of those widgets. So I think saying that there is funding to support this and that it is not something additional that's just given to folks to say you have to do it this way, but you don't have the skills or the resources to find it. We're saying if we're putting HB 1082 forward, there needs to be funding to support it. And I think that what you just said is perfect from a work group perspective. And then what is defined after that is okay with the work group. I don't think we are tied to any particular way that it has to be done. Remember, a lot of our work group members are not a part of either of these systems, right? So their recommendations are just that, and we would leave it to the folks who have to do the work to then figure out the best mechanism.
Great. I know there's other hands raised. Let me just put in chair's prerogative. I know we're above the 15-minute level, 15-minute limit, but I as chair am basically saying that we need to learn from this first one to see how this process unfolds and what's our endpoint. So allow a little bit of leeway. I also want to put in my 2 cents as part of the discussion, however, is that what we lack today is actually our 2 legislators who are part of this group. And so to some extent, it would be great to have also their perspective, not to say that, they are but one vote, each on this group. But what I'm not getting here right now is, if we're too proscriptive with being already set of writing a piece of legislation that it's 250 and it's 2 and it's all, is that what they're looking for ultimately? Or would they prefer that we have language that basically says this is important? I think what the group is agreeing upon is plain language, public health information is critical. And so that may be another reason to sort of say that we may not be ready for a full sort of delineation other than to take it. Don't forget, all we're doing is saying it's passed on to the June slate. We're going to have further discussions at a June slate. I would opt for the more general language versus the specific language, but let's go to Tony. I think Tony had her hand up first and then Nilesh.
I'm finished. I'll defer to Nilesh.
Nilesh, and then Dushan. Yep.
So sure. So I've been, as a constructive kind of like what would be a framework. So my suggestion is, right, taking this, I'd love to see, the recommendation is that, let's say all public facing information coming from health departments is in plain language by, I don't know what year, like we can pick a year, right? And that, I think that would offer a framework for the recommendation then of the funding, right? But right now, as it's written, and I've read this like 3 times while we're talking, it doesn't actually set a standard for us to require all health department, MDH, LHD communications be in plain language. So to my mind, right, what you really want is you want to say, this is what we expect at the end of this process. Whatever, we can throw a date on it. We can choose that. And then the pieces that are underneath that will make more sense. And then I think even framing that, those dollars might make more sense. We can agree or disagree, but to I think Boris, you mentioned, right? It doesn't say that's the, these funds for 2 people isn't the only thing, but what is our expectation of health departments then? Is it that they should do it as much as they can? Is it that everything should be that? Some of it is technical, right? Like that's kind of where I'm getting at with the recommendation is we have to set the goal as well, because the implementation then should inform how we're getting to the goal. The goal here is amorphous to me. It's a good thing, but it's not a goal yet, is I guess what I'm articulating.
I just want to add, Nilesh, that we've got the hub in place that has mandated for plain language to be used across not only the Maryland Department of Health and the local health departments, but in other agencies as well. So this recommendation, and I think every other recommendation that is going to come forward, not just today, we've asked the work groups to really focus on the assessments, the capacity in their respective area of the system. And so this recommendation rose to the fore, this is my assumption, rose to the fore because it was seen as a step that could be taken to augment the existing resources and process and help move it forward to the ideal. So it probably needs more work in terms of where and how, but it's based on that assessment the commission's done.
So I think Cynthia made a comment that the executive order itself does state that public health should be using plain language. So it's not this, I'm not interpreting this recommendation to be an envisioning of how public health should be communicating. I'm interpreting this recommendation to be that we need more support in order for public health to meet that already stated goal of utilizing plain language in their public facing communications. And so I'm actually looking for a recommendation for what do we need to get to that goal that has already been stated in the governor's executive order. So if I think that's how I'm reading this, right? Like when I read this slide, in the absence of, the specific language of the recommendation from the work group, what I'm reading is that the work group, based on the assessment we've conducted as a commission, is recommending that resources be designated to support a plain language on-call service that's available to the state and local health departments. And I would support that. And if anybody interprets, I don't know if people would interpret that as implementation or whatever, but I do think this recommendation is about implementation. It's about how do we get to implementing the goal that was already laid out for us in the executive order, based on the gaps, right, and the legislation based on the gaps that have been identified in our assessment of the public health system. We're trying to implement ways to improve capabilities of our public health system. So if necessary, I'm happy to amend the motion to make it, instead of the June slate, send it back to the work group to craft the actual language of the recommendation that we'll be voting on, based on the discussion that we've had, and have that re-forwarded to the commission.
Okay, let's finish this discussion, then we can go with amendment. Tosin, you had a comment?
I think I'm going to hold off until the next example. As we go through this, I'm just thinking of the PDSA, the Plan, Do, Study Act, especially as we're thinking broadly on how this would translate to recommendations. But let's see the next couple ones, and then I think, yeah.
So let's stop discussion unless somebody has something to say. I'm not a expert on Robert's Rules of Order. We had a first. Oh, Sylvette, yes.
So I would like to suggest this. I feel as if Tony and I will have to take this back to the work group, because all of our other three draft recs are in the same format. And so we will have this discussion again and again and again. And so I think in the interest of time that we should probably then take back these four and put them in the exact format that has been discussed. So I've heard from Nilesh, definitely by this date, we would recommend also what would be the process for the implementation, verbiage around that. If all of those are in bullet points of things that you would like the work group to do before it's considered, I'd prefer that we would do that than to go over the next three of them, because they're in the exact same format. And I mean, they can be looked at definitely by all the commissioners, but this was the template that we had, but I do understand what everyone is saying. And so I'd like it to be put in a way that it can then go to vote and save everyone that time of discussing like what it should still have or whatever, because our work group can do that. And I prefer if we did that.
Good. And I do want to emphasize, you guys did a great job. You did nothing wrong. We are, learning how to do this. And ultimately, this is important. We have this discussion. And so at this point, I don't know where we're at we don't have a parliamentarian. So you, Shane, are the parliamentarian.
I'm recommending to shift it back to the work.
Okay, so there's amending the thing, the first one. So we have a proposal that the first, I'm not sure if we needed to vote on the first one, but assuming, right. We need a second amendment now, or amendment to basically to push it back to the work group and that, okay, that we push it back to the work group. Is there a second? Okay, Michelle was a second. All commissioners voting for pushing it back to the work group, please say aye.
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 Okay, Nilesh says aye, okay. And then any nays? Any abstaining? Okay, so let's push back to the work group after a vibrant and important discussion. Again, I don't see this as a loss. I see this as a gain. And we do take the Sylvette's as a co-chair recommendation that CPE 001 all the way to 004 be put into work group review status based upon this first discussion. And so therefore, perhaps at this point, should it behoove us to, do we have somebody?
We would move to governance and organizational capabilities, but I think we're also
A break time. Okay, great. So let's, at this point, we're going to go to the governance work group afterwards, and those are already, okay, great. So we'll be taking a 10-minute break here. So at 3:40, we will get back together again. 3:38 actually. And you on the airwaves, please take a break as well. Please stretch, walk around, get some water. Hydration is critical this time of year. Thank you.
in our house.
Okay, everyone, we're on and it's 3:40 or so. Those of you who are on the webinar phase of this in the world of electronics are missing an incredible batch of cookies that Megan brought for us here. So once again, the hybrid meeting allows you to participate, but it doesn't give you free cookies. So I do encourage participation in person if at all possible. We've learned a lot from that first go of this, and again, it's training wheels for a little bit. I guarantee you that as we get more evolved in this and involved in this, we're going to be much quicker on this. But thank you all for a great conversation. We have others in terms of inline, and we're sort of picking and choosing to some extent the ones that are, in our view, ready to be discussed. And we decided at this point that we're going to go and jump back to our submission tracker, and specifically those submitted by the workforce working group. Is that correct, Shane?
Yes.
And let's begin sort of that discussion. So if you would post WKF012, which is now posted on there.
So this submission is to establish a commission to study, assess, and track the state and local governmental public health workforce throughout Maryland. In particular, it looks at establishing a multidisciplinary commission housed in partnership with a qualified academic or research institution to provide strategic leadership and oversight of the state's public health workforce development. Additional information from the work group has been posted on the slide here and shared in the materials. But essentially the goal is to strengthen Maryland's public health system by addressing workforce challenges, promoting equity, and driving evidence-based policymaking to enhance the ability of protecting and promoting the health of all Marylanders.
So Shane, I'm just wondering, I know when the recommendations were submitted from the workforce work group that the language looked like a recommendation, like this recommendation is to so forth. Is there a way to see that language when that was submitted, or is this the new?
This is what we took from that to translate into this. So it should essentially mirror that. Does it look?
It would just be
like,
helpful. I think it would just be helpful if we could see the language of the actual recommendation that we'd be voting on, or unless I'm misunderstanding, the process we want to use in this. My thought was that the work group would make the recommendation, the commissioners would contemplate the language of the recommendation and then make the decision. And this would all be information to help us in contemplating the language of the recommendation. But the language of the recommendation, from my understanding on this one, is for the legislature
Michelle, can you
to
go back for one?
establish.
Nicole is asking online whether is the two first lines, the objective is to establish, is that the recommendation,
Well, that's what I'm at. I mean,
Okay.
I think what the work group submitted, I believe,
It was a Word document that
right.
we, in order to have consistency,
right?
tried to put into this format. So if you want to give us a moment, we can try to pull up the Word document.
And Nina's played a key role on the workforce working group. So are you looking that up as well?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull it up on
Okay.
my internet.
Give us a second as we're looking for the exact language. And again, we're looking at this as today's our trial date of us getting through some of the hiccups on this. So give us a second here. So it goes even beyond the name of it. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the recommendation language itself is
Is it accessible, Shane, or not?
Yes, let me send that to Michelle so she.
We'll be with you shortly. What's that?
I'm gonna stop presenting for a second.
Right, that's fine.
Okay, so this is the actual submission, right? That was submitted by the workforce working group. Nina, are you prepared to discuss this or?
Sure, I can. Is Brian
Is-
or Bethany or Sue on the call?
Brian, Bethany, or Sue? Okay, go on.
Essentially, it's as it's written. I believe the actual language of the recommendation is that the legislation should establish a multidisciplinary commission housed in partnership with a qualified academic or research institution to provide strategic leadership and oversight of the state's public health workforce development. And all the stuff that the slide had already that you saw is from this Word document, as you see here in the bulleted items. But I believe the actual recommendation language that we would be considering would be up at top.
So the 3 lines beyond the title, right? What would be the language? Do you establish a commission or?
And this is perhaps the point again,
Yeah.
you know, from our earlier discussion and from this, and this is the first go around with this. So I think, you know, we're learning as we're going.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe circling back to the work groups to like explicitly state what the recommendation is.
Mm-hmm.
Or if the intent is that the commissioners craft the recommendation from the information that the work group submit, then we just need to be prepared to do that.
Right.
I was under the impression that we were considering the actual language of the
Mhm.
recommendation being submitted by the work group.
Okay.
So I believe this whole thing is the recommendation, actually.
Right.
To establish a commission to study, assess, and track the state and local governmental public health.
Okay, well, let's, you know, we're not putting out this for a vote as yet. Let's open up discussion on this recommendation from the workforce working group. You see it there in front of you. Questions about this commission?
Is it being shown in its entirety? I'm not, if not, can you all scroll so that we can see the entire recommendation?
It's not scrolling for me, so.
We're trying to scroll it.
Have to put it into a different format, to a slide.
I wonder if it's feasible, if we can just share the document with the commissioners, unless you think that it's too, since it all came.
Hold on just one second.
is converting it.
What's that?
He's gonna convert it and send it to me.
Okay, so we're converting it so it's scrollable for us. So hold on one second there. Any initial comments on this? As I know people need to see the whole thing, but let's begin. Let's not waste our silence as we get our technical crew here together on this. Any comments on this? Because my question to I used to be on this workforce and somehow I stepped away and I'm sorry about it. I'm still on it, but the reality of the situation is, do we have other states that have done something like this? Do we know?
Yeah, I think some of this is modeled after other examples.
Uh-huh.
The idea of this one was tied to needing to have data on the public health workforce, so that ongoing data on the public health workforce, so that data could then inform ongoing recommendations about developing the public health. And that's why the recommendation is for an entity to for the ongoing assessing and tracking of the public health workforce.
So data gathering is a key feature of this. Right. Okay, good. Questions, anything that you want clarifications on from commissioner members?
Michelle?
Yeah.
Okay, we can no longer see the screen. Okay, hold on one second. Perhaps it may be easier to go back to our original document since it does have the essence of all this.
We just didn't have the recommendations.
Right. Okay.
But you're right, most of this is on the actual recommendation.
So I'm happy to scroll down as needed, but I mean, I have it, it's just not all compact on one slide.
Okay, so scroll down if you would.
Should we, have we had a chance to send it to the commissioners or, okay. So maybe for the commissioners online, Shane just sent it via email. So everybody has this on their computers for the commissioners.
So is it better to keep this on here if the commissioners all should be getting on email, or should we go back to our general slide? Yeah. Okay.
The only thing is I think it's going to be important.
Probably should be consistent. So if we're having the commissioners look at the Word document, I think in the room and for the recording, we should do this.
Okay. Great. Any discussion as people look at this? Okay, I think that's the next one, right? Okay, commissioners, open for discussion on this. So we have something that other states are using. This is a commission that would set up data about workforce within the state. Something that's utilizable, something that can be.
Monitoring.
It's monitoring workforce. Any comments on this? Vanessa, yes, please. Vanessa?
You're muted, Vanessa.
Vanessa, did you raise your hand?
She was talking, but it looks like she's muted.
Vanessa, check your mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Computer reset. Two questions, sorry. I think Nilesh had to hop on to another call, so he may have missed part of this discussion. I had a quick question on clarification for the first, up until the word to provide, up until the to provide phrase, appears really identical to what the legislature just did. Establish a multidisciplinary commission, house in partnership with a qualified academic or research institution, provide strategic leadership. So I wonder if we want to think about retooling that. And the second, I think, is I'm struggling with the responsibilities piece of this. And how to engage an outside academic institution in PA twins, data, hiring practices.
I mean, this is what the work group.
Okay, we take your comments. I don't think we, so this is what is coming from the work group, right? So Sue, you have your hand raised. Thank you, Sue.
Sorry, I missed two work groups, so I'm struggling here. But Vanessa, I believe this is where Brian was talking about the disparities in between regions in Maryland, where as the overall state recruits, they're recruiting from the overall state versus most of the people that are going to apply for that job are local. And I'm not speaking to it as well as he would have, but it came out of the health officers. Mina might be able to help me. The health officers focus group, where we talked about where we get people who apply for the job, but they're never going to come because the way it's posted by the whole salary range. People are looking at the top end of that salary, and we don't have the availability to offer that type of thing. So the recruitment's actually local within the state versus statewide. That's what I believe he was targeting in there.
Okay, thank you. Comments, questions, any further discussion, Nina?
Yeah, I mean, again, the idea of this is to establish an entity that continues to monitor the governmental public health workforce at state and local levels in Maryland. And there are suggested activities that the entity, in this case, the entity is described as a commission, but there are suggested activities that the entity could then undertake in that process of monitoring, assessing, and hopefully contributing to further development of the public health workforce. So I think, again, the intent of the recommendation is to establish a monitoring entity.
Good, thank you for that clarification, Nina. Anything else? Comments on this?
I guess clarification,
Yep.
if I could. I think Vanessa mentioned there was already a multidisciplinary commission created. Do you know?
There was for healthcare workforce, there was for behavioral health.
I think
This is focused on public health.
So it's similar to some other entities that already have a commission?
There are time-limited commissions that have been established for behavioral health that aren't just focused on workforce, but that are looking at,
Right.
a variety of topics related to behavioral health.
Okay, Nicole?
Hi, my question, just in context with some of the things that were discussed with the previous recommendation, the next to the last bullet point. Well, first let me say, I think this is great. Like I love the premise behind this. The next to the last one that talks about an annual statewide, detailed workforce development plan. I'm just thinking about how long it's been taking us to do this work and whether we think that is it feasible to require that to be annual, or is there an opportunity to perhaps revise the frequency with which that type of report would be or plan would be created? I don't have any other comments about this one.
I mean, again, I think this would be up to the commission if they want to get into the details of this and make recommendations to that level of specificity. We could certainly decide to do that, or I think we could decide to say we don't want that level of specificity in the recommendation. And sorry, correction, I saw Vanessa's comment that she was referring to this commission, but just to clarify, this commission sunsets. And the purpose of this commission wasn't to just study the workforce. The purpose of this commission was to study public health capabilities and services delivered through the public health, the governmental health system, essentially, with workforce being one component.
Great, Tosin?
Yeah, I just wanted to get clarification. As we're sending in recommendations, would you prefer that some of these be data driven? Especially, because I'm looking at the template now. If it will add more to the justification, and that thought came to mind when Nicole was, mentioning the 1 year plan and all that. Like, is that this? Do we want that as well, or how do we want to approach that? Or are we just are we just responding to the report?
I think we have an assessment. That assessment's been conducted. We have data from that assessment that's driving some of these recommendations. We have experts on our work group and who are engaged in the topics of the work group, sometimes at a national level and so forth, and they're providing their input. I think certainly as a commission, we're considering whatever the work groups put forward, and we can choose to modify the language of what comes from a work group, or ask the work group to relook at the language if we think that's necessary.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments on this? Is this one that we have a proposal to move it at least to the June slate? Okay, Nicole?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm still just struggling a little bit with this process. And I know that we are continuing to learn as we go. So I appreciate that. As we are deciding whether to move something forward, are we getting in the weeds? Are we not getting in the weeds? If we don't get in the weeds, when are we going to get in the weeds? Because at some point, the recommendation is going to include this level of detail that we're seeing. And so I would just request some clarification about this process, because I still am confused about how we're moving forward.
Yeah, from my perspective, we'd like to get into the weeds as much as possible if there's a comfort level going into the weeds, right? I mean, at some point, we're going to have to sort of have a slate of things. And this brings up another issue, which is we're not obligated by the piece of legislation that created us to actually have, a full agreement on the recommendations, right? There is the ability for us to have dissenting votes. We as a commission obviously are looking at the idea that a majority has put this forward. We need to sort of figure out a way to have dissenters and all that. But getting back to your question in the midst of all this is, yeah, I think having as much specifics in here would be great, provided that we have a comfort level across the board as we're discussing this, right? So I know my answer is a little wishy-washy, but the more detail we have, the better it is for us to walk away as a commission saying we provided some direction.
My opinion would also be that specificity here is going to be helpful. It doesn't have to be ironclad because, these are recommendations, and some of these recommendations will be picked up by the legislature. Some of them will be picked up by the governmental public health entities themselves to implement in their own systems. Some of them may be picked up by others in the system. But I feel like without specificity, we're creating a visioning document. And I don't know that that's the gap we're trying to fill. I feel like the legislature tasked this commission with making recommendations for improving the public health system. And in order to do that, I don't know saying, public health needs to be better at understanding its workforce will suffice. I mean, I think we need to be explicit with how public health can understand its workforce. And sometimes that might mean that we make specific recommendations about implementation. And I we've done this thorough assessment. We've had incredible feedback from stakeholders and, you know, the parties themselves to help guide us in making those implementation recommendations. And we have all these amazing experts and work group, you know, across the work groups who are providing their input in this process and drafting these recommendations. So I actually support recommendations that are a little bit more specific, with the understanding they're recommendations. They have not translated to legislative verbiage at this point.
And I think that's a key feature, is we're not writing the law here. What we're trying to do is trying to have people be inspired by our boldness in terms of having the recommendations go through. So, but again, it's, you know, the commission needs to make a decision as to how much we want to delve into it. It's also, we can't spend too much time, I'll be honest with you, delving into the I's and the T's being crossed and dotted, et cetera, right? So the question is, we are relying on our working groups to a large extent, with oversight by the commission, right? That the expertise is within the working groups, and in essence that we, you know, have a belief in a path forward on this. There also is the public comment period, again, that allows us to modify this. So you know, the slate that comes through is in essence a draft slate, right? And that allows us also to spend time as a commission, because we are, you know, yes, we're looking at public comments. Yes, we want the June meeting to solidify that we have a belief in this, but based on public comments and maybe 30 days of us looking at this more closely, we come back to our last few meetings basically saying we're going to modify these things for the final report. All right, this is a draft until it's a final. Nicole, yes.
Last comment. Thank you. That what you and Mina just shared is incredibly helpful. And I would just suggest, you know, given what you both shared in our original charge and the passion that has been present throughout these last however long we've been meeting, that we really do remain aspirational and bold. And just to go back to my comment about, you know, well, maybe is annual too much? I think we should be bold and aspirational and say what we think needs to happen, and then allow, you know, the legislature, they will decide, like you said, whether which of this becomes law. So yeah, that was very helpful. And then I wonder if moving forward, is it helpful for us to just really stick to the primary recommendation and like the spirit of it, and unless there are no significant objections to the spirit of what's being suggested, that we move on to the next one.
Yeah. Dushanka?
Yeah, I was, Nicole, I appreciate your comment about the spirit of these. I think given that we're learning during this session about the process, but there's been wonderful work done by each of the work groups that have submitted our first roster of recommendations. It might be worthwhile walking through every one of them from the topic area, you know, and asking a few questions, moving to the next one, so everything is heard, because we're now providing both what we had today plus the additional one, so the commissioners might be able to better grasp the breadth of the complexity and the foundation of these recommendations. So Nicole's recommendation about sort of the sense of the whole on the concept as it moves forward to tighten it up might be useful for us.
So are we though, if we're still continuing to entertain motions on the individual recommendations, I would make a motion to adopt the language of this recommendation.
I second.
For this June slate. And then we have a second as well, okay? And again, well, let's look at it as the spirit, you know, moving ahead, that this is something we will support, and then we'll still give it. Okay. So we have a,
Michelle, do you mind scrolling up to the actual recommendation part of the language?
so the actual recommendation that we're supporting here is in essence the wording here that Mina will read out again because my eyesight isn't good enough.
Okay. Establish a commission to study, assess, and track the state and local governmental public health workforce throughout Maryland. The legislature should establish a multi-D commission housed in partnership with a qualified academic or research institution to provide strategic leadership and oversight of the state's public health workforce development.
Okay, as stated here. So we have a support of this. We have a second. Is there any further discussion on this wording here? There being no discussion, I'll ask the commissioners to say whether they're in support of this moving to the June 6th slate. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any nays? Anyone abstaining? Okay, good. Our next one. Nilesh had to hop off. Yes, thank you, Vanessa.
So the next recommendation from the workforce work group is to develop and implement a statewide public health workforce training strategy, which is to ensure a well-prepared, effective, and sustainable governmental public health workforce. The legislature should allocate necessary resources and direct the Maryland Department of Health to develop and implement a comprehensive statewide training strategy focused on upskilling, professional development, and retention. And there's some additional information to support the language of the recommendation below.
Great. Let's open up without there being a motion as yet, just a general discussion on this topic matter.
And again, for the commissioners online, if you check your emails, you'll have this document as well.
Any comment on the statewide public health workforce training strategy?
Is there a statewide, I'm assuming the answer is no, but is there a strategy in place currently?
Not that I'm aware of. I know the state health department has some efforts related to workforce development. Individual local health departments may have some for their own employees. I think the intent with this is to make develop a comprehensive strategy that's available to state and local health department employees that addresses multiple types of employees and levels of employees.
Thank you.
Okay, so we should probably. I think we can still discuss. Okay, we're going to go into further discussion though. We were a little concerned because we believe we have one Commissioner Mora who might have signed off. We don't see her. Mora, are you on in any other fashion? And then Vanessa, is it true Nilesh is still on, but he's not present for these discussions? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so unfortunately, we're in a position right now of having lost our quorum, which was present at the beginning of the meeting. I propose that we still continue with having this group discuss these, and hopefully we'll get through some of the questions that may have to be brought up at the next meeting, or unless people return on to this meeting. We'll monitor whether people sign back on. Vanessa, if you'd let us know, I think we're still going to be short one. Is that correct? Even if Nilesh comes back on the quorum thing. Any other further questions? What we're going to do is go through the workforce ones, just so all of you who are on at least have a visual on this, and we have the ability to continue and utilize our time here. We have another 45 minutes of this meeting. As we finish the workforce ones, if we get through them quickly, then we'll bounce back to discussions on some of the other ones. What I don't want to do is just not have our time well spent here today. So any other questions on this statewide public health workforce training strategy? Okay, if there aren't further questions, let's just move to the next one without a vote because of our lack of quorum here. Okay. You know, anything that you?
This is, you know, you can read what's on the screen. It's essentially the bolded in the first paragraph. But essentially the recommendation is for local health departments to maintain and strengthen their health reserve corps to ensure emergency public health response readiness. And this specifically calls on the legislature to establish or allocate resources to expand and strengthen out the Maryland Response Medical Reserve Corps, and to support the county-based medical reserve corps development.
Great. Questions on the MRCs throughout our state? Just current status. I mean, you probably can answer this question. Does every county have an MRC now or not?
So the state has an MRC. Most jurisdictions access that MRC, but the MRC is kind of branded at the state level. I think part of the intent, from my recollection, the conversation around this work group recommendation was that there'd be greater support for the county local activities around those individuals who are part of the MRC that are from that jurisdiction.
Great. Other questions, discussions on the MRC? We'll keep scrolling down a little bit so we can take a look here.
Nicole made a comment about the
Yeah.
reserve versus medical reserve. And thank you, Nicole, for noticing that. I think that's probably something we need to clarify with the work group further, is the language there. So we make sure we're not confusing or only talking about medical reserve corps, or is this something broader than just the medical reserve corps?
Okay, Vanessa from the health department. Yes.
Would it be appropriate at all in this situation to consider regional approach or regional implementation or considerations? I know Virginia has one of the strongest medical reserve corps of all of the states, and a considerable number of those members in the Virginia corps are Maryland residents.
Yeah, and thanks for raising that, Vanessa. And that was part of the discussions of the work group, that we need more support for, that's where this work recommendation came from, really, is that we need MRC not to be visualized as just, something coming from the State Health Department of Baltimore, that volunteers are recruited locally often, and they want to support their own communities or their own region of the state. And so that's why this recommendation is to get more resources to our local jurisdictions so that we can build a more local presence for the MRC, and have the volunteers from our own region who want to support our region. So here in this recommendation, it says local jurisdictions, but certainly one local jurisdiction could take on a regional approach. Right. I mean, ultimately, the resources typically need to go to one entity, which is typically a jurisdictional boundary. But they could serve the region of their state.
Any other questions? Great. Let's move on to the next one then.
So this recommendation is to strengthen legal protections for public health employees through enhanced penalties for threats, harassment, and acts of violence. And the subsequent couple sentences describe or further detail out the recommendation.
Right, we'll allow you to peruse it and we'll scroll down shortly.
And there's, just so people know as you're reading, there is some precedent for this because this, a similar piece of legislation actually was considered by our Maryland legislature some years ago and did not pass. And there are a variety of states, including, I think Wisconsin was named as one, that has some potential model legislation around this that I believe the work group referenced.
Great, any questions, comments on this?
Since we're not voting on it anymore at this time, since we don't have quorum, or if there's constructive comments that the work groups could then act on until the next meeting on these recommendations, it would be helpful to hear those.
Great, let's move on.
So this is really to delineate out a Maryland Public Health Board as a way to build that pipeline into public health careers or governmental public health careers, because we know based on the assessment, of course, the challenges we have with the governmental public health workforce and the the consequences of those gaps in the workforce, compromising our ability to provide public health core services. So this recommendation is essentially to build that Maryland Public Health core pathway. There are, of course, there's the initiative under the Department of Service and Civic Innovation for a Maryland core program. So the thought was that the Maryland Public Health core could be built as a component of that Maryland core program.
Okay, we'll slowly scroll down. Tosin, you have a comment?
Yeah, I am trying to find academic institutions here. When you're talking about pathways and is it part of the language? I see the local departments.
Yeah, I don't believe the intent of this recommendation was to have the academic institute, if that's what you're asking.
Can you guys please, can you please go back up to the recommendation? I just want to make sure that I'm clear on it. Corps to establish. Yeah, I do believe that there'll be great benefits in including academic institutions, because when you talking about public health careers, people have to graduate, right? It would help smoothen the process. So it's that's just what I feel.
I mean, the purpose of this was to create a pathway, or like that, the core program, right? Public health core program. Could you clarify what kind of involvement you would see from the academic institutions?
Yeah, the students can serve as volunteers in the core program, and and ultimately maybe get jobs upon graduation. But I think integrating them into that system helps to strengthen the public health pathways. That's just my thought. But but unless a bullet.
I think Nicole, you had a comment. Do you mind speaking up?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just noting that several of the bullet points, including the first one, it's not showing on the screen, But the first bullet point
Oh.
is about creating a college student summer public health experience, and it talks about partnering with colleges and universities. And then there's the next to the last one talks about collaborative design and implementation, and it says involve academic institutions. So I think, and then the one before that, promote inclusive recruitment, also refers to academic partners. So I don't know if Tosin, if you prefer
Yeah.
that it be more explicit in the formal recommendation, but it is included in some of the bullet points.
Oh, okay. I'll check the link directly. And I only asked that because I didn't see it, but I just thought it would be it would be critical. But if it's there, then that's fine. It doesn't matter as long as it's stated somewhere. Thanks.
I'm not sure if it's in this one.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we're referring to the same one here. Let me,
Because I don't see.
the one we're discussing right now is WKF-016, correct?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was ahead of you. I'm in the next one. Sorry.
Yeah,
Then
well-
Tosin may be absolutely correct then.
The one I'm talking about is the one on the screen that says expand Maryland Corp to establish Maryland Public Health Corp pathway into governmental public health careers, right? You're saying the legislature should, under Department of Civic and Innovation, establish a Maryland Corps program that is structured based on entry points into career, right? Into MDH and LHDs. People have to graduate. I feel like for the longest time, there has been disconnect, right? You see especially the younger generation, we need to change the way we're approaching, our workforce so that it can streamline entry and it needs to be attractive. So I think it's just nice to consider that all parties be at the table. It doesn't hurt to include academic institutions if we're talking about public health career pathway. A lot of literature have pointed to that anyways. That's just my thought. I'll rest my case. Thanks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know, yeah, that's fine too. I think the academic piece of things is covered in the next, perhaps the next recommendation. Is that okay to move?
Yeah, so
forward?
let's move on to the next one. I just want for the record, I think we're not at quorum yet. No, okay.
So this, I think Tosin addresses more what you're raising. I think the public health core is merely like the structure of the experience, but in terms of the engagement of the academia, that's more about this recommendation, which is establishing a public health career pathways program.
And those of you who are at home and have these copies, you can read on your own. Others who are looking at the screen will scroll shortly.
Again, this is all about workforce pipeline. And in this particular recommendation, highlighting the importance of engaging students at the high school level. Because as we know, our public health workforce is quite multidisciplinary. And we may have members of our workforce who are not, pursuing college degrees.
Okay, comments?
Would it make sense based on that feedback for the work group to look at, is there merging that might occur there, or are they truly two distinct things?
I think the idea was that they were distinct. Actually, these recommendations merge several other recommendations together into them. So like this one probably reflects about 3 different recommendations that were merged into one. I think the idea was that the public health core is the entity, and that this is, and the medical reserve core is an entity that's advanced, right? Expanded, that one we talked about, and that this is how we better engage students at the high school and academic or an undergraduate level into this kind of pathway. That could feed into the public health core, for example.
Right, any comments on this as a package, as sort of explained as 2 distinct, not distinct, there's sort of an interplay here, but one idea focus on the academic partnership, the other on this core pathway. Any comments from anyone? Yes, Maura.
Yeah, sorry, I had to get off and came back on. I have totally agree with the pipeline, but I guess I'm reading the first two sentences. What was the rationale for directing MACHO to create the Career Pathways Program versus some other organization or,
Yeah.
or institution?
Yeah, I think the idea was to enhance the role of the discussion came around because of the idea of enhancing the role of the state association of city and county health officials to be more involved in workforce pipeline development. And that often the high school engagement and the undergraduate engagement would happen at local levels with the local health departments typically.
I'm okay with it. I just don't think it's very practical, but we can be visionary.
And Maura, we did lose you for a little bit, in which case I think also Nilesh had to sign off. So we're no longer at a quorum here, even with your retreat. So we're not voting. We're just discussing at this point. Hopefully we'll expedite our voting to the slate to the next level at the next meeting. So that'll explain why we're not voting anymore on these things. But you should have received the package. I'm not sure if you were on of all these recommendations from the workforce working group should have been emailed to you.
Yes,
So,
I had that. Thank you.
thank you. Okay, so if there's no other further discussions on the workforce issues, any last thing, we're going to go back to the governance recommendation and have a discussion on that one as well. So are we okay here? So we're going to go back to the old slides.
Thank you.
And while Michelle's pulling that up, I'll tee it up for Barbara, who is on the online to get ready. But this recommendation, GOC -011, relates to a co-creation or co-design model with respect to policy development within the public health system in Maryland. And the idea is that it's to develop and implement a framework for co-creation within Maryland's governmental public health system that includes shared leadership, learning, decision-making, system-wide, and mutual accountability. It was originally marked as work group review on the tracker that was just updated recently. I believe it's ready for discussion, but based on the earlier conversation, we may have to iterate a little bit more. So I'm just kind of teeing that up, that if it feels like there's some additional things that are needed here, that is perhaps why. Barbara, are you available?
I am on. Thank you. Yes. And the prior discussions did, well, I am curious to hear what your thoughts are after reading this and considering the prior discussions. I think for us, in the spirit of co-creation, we were hesitant to dictate at this stage, one-sided, if you will, almost, but dictate what the co-creation structure and expanse should be. We believe that in the spirit of co-creation, that it should be undertaken by those who would be involved in the co-creation. And in terms of the recommendation being supported by the assessment, we lean heavily upon the assessment findings provided by University of Maryland. However, it is also consistent with what presenters had also communicated. We have some really good beginning components with, there was some mention of the health officers having a regular set time meeting with the Deputy Secretary for Public Health Services. And that was highlighted as one of the successes that we should continue doing and do more. So I think For us, our recommendation is that a framework be co-created, but that it's not something that we were comfortable dictating exactly which framework and who all should be at the table, because it should be done in a collaborative process between Maryland Department of Health, the health officers, MACHO, the Maryland Association of County Health Officials, perhaps MDE and others, or in a different combination. I'd be happy to entertain any questions or thoughts.
And in addition to the information on this slide, there is additional information on the following slide that goes into a bit more detail on some of the requested information from the template about justification and so forth. So there's more.
Yeah, thank you, Shane. And actually, so and when co-create, or the benefits of co-creation are most evident when you have complex systems. So the complexities that we're dealing with every day, that we have some shared models of response or areas of shared responsibility, sometimes yes, sometimes no. We have processes that would benefit from streamlining, and then there had been mention of administrative burdens and inefficiencies. And that's where co-creation can really help to improve the communication, the clear definitions of who does what and when. And that's why we believe that the co-creation model could be beneficial in addressing gaps in our capacity currently, and ultimately to address public health issues efficiently and effectively. Thank you.
Great. Discussions on this? Questions? Clarifications?
So again, for this recommendation, I think it's important to note that this isn't a recommendation that's calling upon the legislature, right? This is a recommendation that's calling upon the governmental public health system, the state and local health departments, to work together to create this framework.
Right. It's an administrative, yeah.
Right. But that's important to note, that the recommendation is not, it's not necessarily a policy recommendation.
Correct. We had not envisioned that there would be a stone etched that said, "Thou shalt co-create." Right.
But I do like the spirit of this, right? Which is, in essence, is once again, I mean, it goes into the whole world of, where are we trying to do? We're trying to be practical. We're trying to be concrete. We also need to have the aspirational components, which is, if we are trying to achieve a betterment of the public health system in the state of Maryland, getting people to co-create is going to be a pathway, a very almost 21st century novel pathway, right, that we are condoning here. So this is good. Anyone else from the commissioners' comments? Okay, again, as we have no quorum, we won't be able to move things ahead for the slate. So at the next meeting, we'll reassess some of these again. That'll give us a little bit more time for us to look at these. Are there any others, Shane, that are worthy of us looking at right now in our last 20 minutes of this meeting?
There were a couple within the communications and public engagement work group that they had not submitted because they're still working on. So in addition to the 4 that they're taking back, there are 2 that they're still discussing internally. And then the funding work group had several submissions. However, neither of the co-chairs could be present today, and they felt very strongly that they'd like to be present for that. So I would suggest that as we get more information and are able to share that, but we will do so, but at least the descriptions are available on the tracker as we have them. And I fully expect that our work groups will continue developing and adding to this list based on what we've heard today.
Great. So let's move to sort of the next component of our agenda, which is announcements, actually new business first. So in terms of, so agendas will have us, our further agendas will have a section to focus primarily on the resubmissions that are ready for review, as Shane has mentioned. One is we had some discussions today. We're going to take our lessons learned from how the process worked and where we got encumbered a little bit. We also want to go back and obviously refocus the working groups to make sure that ultimately we're all on the same page of what's being submitted to us, right? And again, my sense is we're going to get, really good at this. And today, thank you for your participation, your discussion, and for your comments on this. It's very important, however, for the commissioners to be engaged and offer feedback at these meetings. This is really our forum for discussion. What we'll make sure we do is that the commissioners will be given paper well ahead of time, right? As much as possible. We're getting submissions oftentimes at the last minute, but we realized this was a rush for us since we were preparing for this meeting and some of the submissions were coming in just in the last few days. So we want to make sure that we are timely in terms of making sure commissioners are looking at this. I think the spirit needs to be put out there that we, in essence, are, trying to get as concrete as possible, as specific as possible, to the comfort level of the various commissioners, right? And at the end, what we're trying to do is put together a slate that's going to make an impact out there. Once again, we also have to have faith that the working groups are filled with the experts on this, that I don't pretend to be an expert on funding. And so therefore, although I have knowledge of public health, but if I'm looking at what the work groups are giving me, I take, strong credence in the belief that they are really trying to move ahead on this. And to a large extent, it's not a blanket sign off by Boris Lushniak on what I need to sort of see how this falls in. But we really have put a lot of trust into our working groups to make sure that they are the thinkers as well. For us as commissioners, is ultimately is to put together the whole package. And so therefore, I do want under new business here, I know this is still any other feedback of today's process, whether you want to do it now in public or send us an email of any improvements that you as commissioners would recommend. We certainly, have a few weeks to prepare ourselves once again for the next. Not many. Yeah, not many. So get us ideas of how do you think that this is the best use of our time. We also want the working group leads to be present, representatives of the working groups as their sessions are being discussed, because you can see how important it is for explanations to be and questions to be answered. The staff and the commissioners are not, by de facto, aren't the experts in these areas either. I think having them placed there as well are important. To the commissioners, we are going to ask you, as Shane started with during his part of the discussion, to really look at your calendars, right? And if you aren't going to be able to attend, we need to know. I mean, this is one of those all hands, and maybe we just need to send a poll out or something to the commissioners with a Excel spreadsheet or something with X the dates that you won't be there, right? Because we need to make sure that we do have quorums on this. And if there are special dates that, we've already set up a meeting and only 3 of us are going to be there, we obviously have to choose alternate dates because we can't afford to lose quorum like this. So that's under new business. Any other new business or comments on the process here today? First, I'll turn to our web-based commissioners. Alan.
Hey, thank you. And yes, we are learning through this process today. As a commissioner, having access to the tracker and having an idea of what will be discussed and reviewed on the agenda is very helpful. I think what could be more helpful is actually having the language ahead of time for review as possible. Understanding that there were, late submissions, but I don't know if that's possible or not to circulate drafts to the commissioners ahead of time. But personally, that would help me be more prepared to discuss and ask questions. Thank you.
Right, we're all in agreement here, Alan, and we'll try our best to make sure that at least, you know, again, we're going to be getting sort of this rolling submission component, but we certainly can put a drop dead date for what we're going to be discussing, let's say, right? You know, 3 days ahead of time so that
I mean,
commissioners
I
at
think
least
we
have.
did, and then
Yeah.
the work groups just weren't ready.
Right.
We just want to
Yeah.
make sure we have content for this.
Yeah.
meeting today.
But this is good. Thank you, Al. Anybody else with comments on process? Okay, there being none, let me go to announcement section. So our next meetings are basically April 15th is our next meeting. And that's going to be a hybrid only meeting. Virtual only. That's what I meant to say. The word hybrid came out. So virtual only meeting. And once again, we need to make sure that people are there. If you aren't going to be there, let us know, or we'll maybe send a poll out, but anyhow. So April 15th, and that's a different time slot, right? It's 1 to 3 p.m. on the Tuesday. So once again, look at your calendars, and we need everybody there for the 2 hours time span so we can move these things ahead. Wilson will be the presiding co-chair at that meeting. The meeting after that is the May 1st meeting. It's a standard meeting, hybrid meeting here. May 20th is another one of our extra meetings. That's also 1 to 3 p.m. online only. And then June 5th will be a hybrid meeting here. July 10th, hybrid meeting here. August 21st, hybrid meeting here. September 11th, hybrid meeting here. My hope is that we won't have to add any additional meeting dates to that. That's where we're keeping our fingers crossed, but that also is determined by our progress to make sure that we're on target with our timeline. So once again, thank you all for your attendance here today. What we want to make sure is that we, in essence, have the opportunity to have discussions here. Rosalie, I know you raised your hand, but at this point, what we're doing is we're limiting our comments from commissioners only. So please send us either a chat or an email. And what we're trying to do now is to make sure that we have that ability to discuss these things fully and in depth. We're going to try to limit discussions, as I said, to the 15-minute time slot, if at all possible. I know today we went over on some of these, but again, this was part of our learning a new process. I now would like to ask for a motion to adjourn today's meeting.
So moved.
We have a so moved. Do we have a second? We don't have quorum, so I guess we can't even.
Second, I don't know if it matters. Yeah.
Don't have a quorum, so I guess we can adjourn this meeting. So this is very inconvenient because I think we're stuck here until April 15th or until others come on board. This is really inconvenient. What happens?
Chair's prerogative.
Chair's prerogative is to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for your attention here today.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah, I'd probably be stuck here forever. Okay, good.
Thank you. I know that was